All right, everybody. If you are at the Headwaters Science Center here in person, we are about to begin the snake feeding. If you are watching online, we have just gone live as well. So you're hearing me talking and seeing me in front of a snake, and you know what that means. It is 3:30, which means it is time for one of our after-school STEM shows. These are shows that we do every single afternoon at 3:30. Various different science topics. The snake feeding is a regular feature because obviously we have to feed these snakes every once in a while, so we keep bringing it back. And so today we're going to be feeding all 5 of the snakes that we have here at the Headwaters Science Center. So first up is going to be Rusty the boa here. And like I said, we offer these snakes food once every other week. So every other Saturday is snake feeding day. Most of these snakes could eat significantly less than this, and so when I say we offer them food once every 2 weeks, what I mean is I don't expect all of them are going to take it every single time. In particular, some of the bigger ones, any of the ones that are shedding will oftentimes skip a feeding or two. So like I said, we're only feeding these once every 2 weeks, but any of these snakes could go significantly longer than 2 weeks without eating and be fine. And in fact, most of them pretty regularly do. So I'm offering to 5 snakes. I don't expect all 5 are going to eat. But first up here is going to be Rusty, who Rusty tends to be a pretty consistent eater, although he does have a shed coming up, and sometimes shedding can be a limiting factor for how willing they are to strike at food and eat. And one of the things you'll notice is that I have some newspapers set down in all of the tanks that have the bark at the bottom of it. And so when snakes eat their food, they have to swallow it whole. And so one of the struggles with that is that we do not feed live food here, we feed rats. And so we get these rats frozen. The way we thaw them out is we just put them in a bucket of water and let them soak and thaw out for a few hours before we bring them out. Then I zap them in the microwave for a minute right before I come out. And so they come out wet, I guess is the long and short of that. And a wet rat is going to stick to that bark. And we don't want our snakes swallowing a whole bunch of bark whenever they swallow their food. So these newspapers that you're seeing out in all the tanks that have the bark at the bottom, it's kind of a placemat for them. And as such, I would much prefer my snakes to feast on that placemat. And so with Rusty, you'll notice he's quite a ways away from it. So I'm going to have to try and hopefully tease him over here a little bit. And so what our snakes are getting are rats or mice. Big ones get rats, little ones get mice. So I guess we can actually, before we do that, we can do a quick show around, show what we're getting today. So like I said, we have 5 rats and mice, or 5 snakes that are eating, and they're getting rats and mice. So biggest one gets the biggest rat, yada, yada, yada. So Rusty is our second biggest snake, so he's getting this rat, which is the second biggest one. And we'll see if we can tease him over here. And so we've had Rusty for about 1.5 years now. He's actually our newest snake. We got him last November. But he came to us as a former pet, was very used to being handled before he came here, which is kind of what we try and do here. We don't try and get snakes that we really have to train. We would rather have a snake that's used to visiting with people when it comes to us. So what I'm going to do actually here is, can you crack open the side of it for me? And what we'll do is we'll tease over the newspapers a little closer to him so I don't got to bait him as far. Because Rusty is a very consistent eater. I don't know if he skipped a feeding the entire time we've been here, which like I said is every 2 weeks for like over 1.5 years or almost 1.5 years at this point. But like I said, he is not on the newspapers. We want him to eat on the newspapers. And what you'll see is he probably will directly strike at it. He strikes pretty much every time, and you can see he knows about it now. And like I said, he is coming into a shed, and one of the things that happens with the shed is their vision kind of gets kind of cloudy because they don't have eyelids. They just have skin that's over their eyes, and it gets kind of cloudy as part of the shed. And so their vision gets worse, which sometimes makes them a little jumpy, also makes them a little protective sometimes. And so that's why you might have noticed there's been a sign on Rusty all day that says, "Sorry, I can't come out, I'm shedding." Because we are a little more leery about them when they're shedding because they can be a little bit less predictable because they're a little bit on guard. And so he's interested in it, but he's being kind of lazy right now. Doesn't necessarily want to come up and chase it down. So I want to get him all the way over here if I can. You can see he's tracking it. Like I said, their vision's not very good, but the way that they tend to find their food is more based on what's kind of like smell. It's called chemoreception. So when they're flicking their tongue out, that's what they're doing. It uses the same type of particles in the air that smell does, but they just use their tongue to do it rather than their nose. And so that is a very strong sense for them. So you'll see them kind of doing short little tongue flicks, trying to kind of narrow down where this thing is so you can strike at it. Heat is also an important thing. That's why I zap them in the microwave for a little bit right before I bring them out so that they can know the heat. And right now, if I were to touch him in the nose with this, he would take it. Like I said, ideally, I want to bring him over here first, but maybe I can even... Oh. And I don't have to worry about it. I'll bring him over there. So generally, I don't like to handle the snakes right before the feeding because I smell like rats because I've been handling rats. And they could be a little on edge because they know the newspapers mean food is coming out. But when it's not a full rat, I don't have too much to worry about now. So I'll pick them up and toss them on the stairs for the sake of saving us some time. And so that's Rusty the red-tailed boa. And he'll be a good one to come back to. So he'll grab onto that. You'll see he wrapped his body around it. Boas are constrictors. In fact, you'll hear the name boa constrictor a lot of the time. And so he's grabbed onto that. He's wrapped around it. And what they do is they constrict their prey, so they squeeze it. And the goal that they're trying to do when they squeeze their prey is they're trying to stop the blood from flowing. A lot of people kind of think of it as like a strangulation that's happening. It's actually a lot faster and a lot more effective than strangulation. If you strangle something, they still get to use the oxygen that's in their blood for a little while until that runs out. If you do this and just squeeze their body until their blood stops flowing, they lose all access to that. They die a lot faster than you would if you strangled them. So that's what constricting snakes do. And you'll see he'll swallow it head first, and he'll swallow it in one big piece. So that's one that I would recommend, even as I'm going around talking here, keep checking back up on Rusty and see what the process is going on there. All right, next is going to be Jeannie the ball python. And can I get one of you to bring the card around for me here? And I don't necessarily really need to be on camera for this one. Alright, so Jeannie is our senior snake, both in age and in tenure here. We've had Jeannie since I think 2012 is when we got her, so about 9 years. But we are not her first owner, so she is actually a, like I said, pretty senior snake in age-wise too. She's about 25 years old. She's getting up there for a ball python. You know, common lifespan for them is about 20. So she's very much an old lady, and that she's starting to show that. She's slowing down a lot. She's not eating as much as she used to. She's, like I said, she's slowing down, not nearly as active as she could be. And that's typical for ball pythons. They tend to be kind of, in my opinion, lazy snakes. But she's kind of exceptionally so right now because she's old. And she is our third biggest snake, so of course she is getting our third biggest rat, which is this guy right here. Ball pythons are also notable in that they are, even among snakes, very, very able to go a really, really, really long period of time without eating. Ball pythons are well documented going like a year plus without eating and being fine. Which is true for a lot of snakes. Boas can similarly go for months at a time without eating and be okay. But ball pythons do it with some regularity. So more than anybody here, she skips her feedings. But we'll see what she's interested in today. She did skip the last one. So, you know, she's even just like rearing away from it as I'm trying to touch her on the nose with it. And so what we do with her a lot of the time is we'll leave the rat in there, and then we'll leave the rat in overnight, and sometimes it's gone in the morning, sometimes it's not. Ball pythons are also nocturnal typically, so they are more active at night and a little more apt to eat at night. African species originally have become invasive in a lot of places because they're so popular in the pet trade. So like when you hear about all those snakes that are loose in the Everglades that aren't supposed to be there, a lot of them are these, just because they're, like I said, popular as pets. But another similar constricting snake, just doing it at a much smaller scale. Ball pythons are actually the smallest species of python in the world. They peak at 4.5 or so feet long. Oh, we'll call that good for her. And like I said, that'll be one where, as we get into the later afternoon and maybe fewer guests start being around, might be one to check up on too eventually. Next, we're going to do Sophie the corn snake, which, I don't know, Ellie, do you want to feed Sophie?
Yeah.
That's yours typically, right? All right. And we're going from our oldest snake to our youngest snake here. So Sophie is a corn snake, and she is 4 years old right now. We have had her here for about 2 years. And corn snakes are, again, a very, very popular species of pet snake. And we're going to have one of our volunteers come in and do a feeding with Sophie. And Sophie tends to be a pretty popular eater, too. Doesn't skip meals very often. We'll actually get her onto the paper, too. And that's a pretty decent sized mouse for Sophie. That's probably pretty close to as big as she could get down. Good general rule of thumb with snakes, when you're talking about how big of a thing they can swallow. Find the thickest part of your snake. You get stretched out just a smidge past that. That's the biggest thing they're going to be able to swallow. They're able to stretch their jaws out almost a full 180 degrees this way. But one of the things a lot of people don't know is they can actually stretch their jaw out this way too. So your jawbone, your mandible, is actually made up of two separate bones that fuse in the middle of the chin. But for snakes, they don't fuse, so they can actually stretch out both axes, which lets them swallow food that is significantly bigger than their own heads. Also means that their bite force is practically nothing, though. Like, one of the things that people are afraid of with snakes, and a common thing I hear people ask me about is, aren't you afraid of getting bitten? I wouldn't want to get bitten, just because who wants to get bitten? Plus, it looks bad in front of all you people. If I were to get bitten during this, all you guys would say, oh my goodness, remember when the snake bit that guy in front of all of us? But the truth is none of the snakes that we're going to be feeding here are even really capable of hurting me in any meaningful way. Even like the big 8-foot-long boa over there, if she were to bite me, like it's a band-aid, we're fine. Because they have pretty much no bite force at all, because they swallow their food whole, so what do you need bite force for? Next up is going to be Sally, who is our smallest snake. Sally is a western hognose snake. So, I guess I normally do a kind of disclaimer here, but we like treat tests. So, all of you guys in the audience, if you're interested in seeing this later, you can go to our YouTube or Twitter or Facebook, and the video will be up there. Also means, don't say anything here that you don't want up on the internet. And Tristan is going to be feeding Sally, right? Oh. Alright. So, yep. So Sally is our smallest snake, so Sally is getting our smallest mouse here. This is called a Fuzzy. And Sally is like I said, a western hognose snake. So this is actually a local, tends to eat most of the time as well. But Sally is actually in a position right now where she is getting pretty old, or sorry, he is getting pretty old. And is starting to develop cataracts in both of his eyes. So he sometimes has some difficulties actually hitting the mouse because he can't see very well. And so again, if you sit there and you tease him with it for a little while and he doesn't quite take it, that's another one where you can set it down on the papers and he'll come and go. He eats pretty much every week. It's rare for him to skip, but like I said, sometimes he has a hard time hitting that dangling mouse because his vision is bad.
Should I just set it down?
Is he still trying to get at it? Yeah, why don't you just set it down for him, and that'll be a good one to you can do it these ways. Here, what are called pinkies with me here. Pinkies are newborn mice, so they haven't even grown their fur yet. These are a pretty common thing if you are doing any type of reptile pairs. It's a pretty common thing that people feed smaller reptiles. So we have a bag of them in the back. They've been there for too long and are starting to get used to them, so I'm trying to use them. And so what we're going to do is offer a pinky to a couple of our non-snake critters today as a snack.
We got tarantulas. Let me make sure I'm good.
Let me clear the stools out of here so they're taking up a lot of space. And we can go from this side here. We'll give it to... And we'll see if he is interested in this or not. So normally they like to pick things off the surface, but the struggle is that pinkies sink. So maybe he'll try and grab that, maybe not. There we go.
Whoa, that's cool.
Unique thing with clawed frogs, they don't have any tongue. So when he has to eat something, he has to use his hands to manipulate around because he can't do it inside of his own mouth. So you'll see him stuff a thing in his mouth, spit it back out, put it back, and we're gonna go back over to the snake. No, we're not gonna get that one. It's too cramped. So, too cramped. We'll go straight to be feeding here today. Artemis. And Artemis is another red-tailed boa, so she's the same species as our first snake that we fed, Rusty. But I know she's quite a bit bigger than Rusty. And that's pretty typical for red tails. Really any reptile, the females get quite a bit bigger than the males do. That's very standard. And so she has actually skipped her last feeding, so she might eat today, she might not. She's also kind of a tricky one to feed because the ceiling of her tank is so low, so I have to come in at kind of a weird angle at it. So if anyone's gonna bite me here today, it's probably her, because I have to come in at a weird angle on her. So she is, of course, getting the biggest rat because she's our biggest snake. And we'll see if she hits it. She can sometimes be a little camera shy, so she's another one where sometimes we'll put the food in there and just leave her overnight. Sometimes she strikes though, but it's not the most common. It's not looking like she's probably going to strike today. She's kind of reeling back from it. But this is another one where she pretty frequently will scoop it up a little bit later once the crowd's broken up a little bit. She can be a little camera shy. One of the things that they also don't love is if the rat is too wet, they'll sometimes not take it. So if they are looking at it and they catch a little stream of water to the nose, sometimes that'll kind of chase them off. In fact, kind of behind the curtain, behind the scenes look here, anytime you're at a zoo and you go to a tank that has big snakes in it, look for a hose. There's always a hose there, because if it bites somebody, the way you get them off is you spray them in the face with water and they just let right go. They hate it. even the good swimming snakes like boas, they still hate it. So yeah, that's Artemis. Like I said, she skipped her last feeding, and she's normally a pretty good eater. Boas in general are known for being pretty voracious eaters, especially among big snakes. So she almost always eats. And she's actually been eating even more commonly than usual because she got some burns on her back from her heat lamp, and so she's been having to shed her skin a bunch to heal those burns. So she's been metabolically having to work a little harder than usual. So she's been eating pretty consistently. We've had her for, again, about a year and a half. We got her and Rusty at about the same time. And she's only maybe skipped less than 5 feedings in that entire time. So I expect she'll take it. But like I said, it might not happen right here, right now. It might happen 5 hours from now. Who knows? The other thing about this is now that all these snakes have been offered food, none of these snakes are going to come out for the next at least day. The ones that actually eat and swallow their food, we usually try and give them 2 days. The ones that just get offered food, we usually give them a day. And the biggest reason for that is that food has been around lately. Again, sometimes they can be a little unpredictable, a little aggressive, a little apt to strike. Because like I said, their vision's bad. So hand that has heat in it and is roughly rat-shaped, and especially if it's my hand and I've been handling rats, smells like a rat. It doesn't know the difference. It's going to hit it if I throw it in there. The other thing about it is, especially for the ones that ate, when you're a snake, your stomach makes up about 1/3 of your body length. And so when you handle them too soon or too roughly or too much too soon after they eat, a lot of times they'll vomit. And one, I'll tell you, cleaning snake vomit is awful. It smells terrible. But two, it's also really strenuous on the snakes because their stomach is so big. So we don't want to do that to them. We don't want to stress them out. I don't want to deal with it. So they're off the menu for the rest of today and at least tomorrow too. But otherwise, that I think is going to do it for the actual snake part of the feeding. I have a couple more pinkies that I'm going to offer out to a couple more critters here just because I said they were just in an old freezer burn bag, and so I just grabbed a big ice cube that had a handful of them in it and thawed them out. Check in tomorrow. It's probably Katura going to be doing something tomorrow. I honestly don't know what her plan is, but here every day at 3:30. We're also open, so if you want to come and watch one of these shows